All right then, guys, can I have your attention, please?
Yeah.
So, I'm going to go through a little bit more advanced stuff with Substance Painter. A lot of it comes through experimentation. In fact, experimentation to the point where this morning I had an idea and thought I'll run with it. So that's what I've been doing this morning. So I'm going to use the asset that we used last week, which is obviously this wonderful, very low poly chest of drawers. So I've been through before about the layering system, how to use Substance by default, but one of the things I'm going to go through today is essentially how to use something called anchor points. Has anyone heard about anchor points before?
No.
All right. So very much how, like in Photoshop, we use things known as clipping masks. Anchor points help drag detail down so that if we're wanting to add scratches or anything like that, it starts to inlay that detail. All right. For the most part, when you create something in Substance, so say for instance, let me just get rid of that and I'll type in normal. So I will use this circle button thing as an example. So if I create a new paint layer, chuck that in the wood, let me just drag it down here. So if I want to use this, I'm just going to paint on the normal layer for this. So to paint on the normal layer only, what you can do is you can just turn these off. All right. However, in the new version of Substance, what you can do is you can just do Alt-click, and it will turn the one that you want on. All right, because we only want to be adding normal detail here. So let's see the one I was going to use. This one here. All right. So now this is going to now apply like a stamp. Okay. All right. So if I want to apply this like a stamp, what I can do is I can hold Control and left click, and you can see that's now sort of bringing this out. What I'm going to do is just sort of drag it up, and I want this to kind of stamp in like this. All right. Now, obviously, I'm aware I'm using what you'd probably say like a metal type normal on a wood piece. However, the idea remains the same. Notice how this edge wear that I've got doesn't actually seem to be informing around the curvature or the detail of this object. All right, this can get quite annoying as we're trying to build something that we want the edge loop, sort of all this detail to kind of curve around. So what we have to do is we have to use an anchor, and what this anchor will do is it will drag this detail here that we've put on onto this normal. All right, now this can be used in height maps as well, but it gets a little bit tricky. All right, so whereas in Photoshop, when you create a clipping mask, you have to have the clipping mask links down. All right, anchors are beneath and pull detail down rather than sort of moving down to get the detail. It drags the detail down, so it's kind of the opposite. All right, so to add an anchor, what you do is you right click your layer, go down until you see add anchor point right here. So you click that. All right, what that'll do is that brings in your layer name. You can see I've already got one here which says detail. All right, but it'll bring in the layer name. You can rename this to sort of, I'll just call this lesson stamp. All right, and that now serves as an anchor point, but we still need to assign it. Now, very much like a generator or anything else that you create as an effect in your layer stack, on the left-hand side, you'll see the properties for that thing. So at the moment, there are no references found for it. So what we need to do is we need to give it a reference. So let's move you there. Let's go on to which one should we do? Let's do the top one here. All right, so I'm going to click the generator for this. All right, now because our generator is generating all of this extra detail you can see on the left there, that's the detail we want to be bringing through. So that's what I'm clicking here. So I'm going to select that, and on the left-hand side we can see my properties. But 3 new options it brings in are micro details, right here, and micro normal. So I've already got this hooked up to something, but I can hook that up later. So it'll look something like this. All right, micro details with micro height and micro normal. Reset those. All right, and the micro normal down here. Now what we want to do is we want to hook these, or one of these, all right, up to this layer here. Now what I do, rather than just clicking the color, I'm going to click micro normal. And you can see where it says resource, we've now got anchor points. I'm going to click lesson stamp. All right, and now that's anchoring down to it. But it's still not changed anything. If I just zoom out, I'll show you the difference. So, anchor point. Putting it on, nothing's really changed. And that's because in our anchor, what we're doing is we're referencing the base color. Now, at the moment, we've got no base color on that layer. So I need to change it to none. All right. So I change that to normal, and then I go to my micro details, and I need to turn micro normal on. You can see there, that's instantly put that detail in. Now you can change the curvature of this, how much it affects, so that that naturally scales with this. All right, you can change any height intensity if you choose to use height, but obviously we've got no height detail in there, and ambient occlusion. All right. Now that I've got that on there, I can start just randomly painting in here with, say, something else. So I can come in, type in normal. This time, use something like this. And you can see it's automatically adding that detail in. And again, it's all nice and fandangled. So we can use that. But to be fair, you might want multiple things anchored to it. So what you could do is you can go here and say, actually, we want a little bit more detail in there. And again, do that. And you can attach multiple things to these points. So this one, I might want slightly more curvature detail in there, but I know that this one, there we go, you can see that's actually still coming in there. And then turn that to normal. All right, so getting multiple pieces in there is useful. All right, and you're able to add much more detail to your work without actually having to physically model it, as long as you've got the normal stamps. Now, in some cases, you may not have that. You can see there as well, if you remove that, the detail will still stay because it's still anchored to those points. So you'd need to delete the layer and the anchor points. So let me just delete this layer. So you may have some which are just height maps, because you might not be able to find them. All right, so here I've got a height map. Let me just get the light on this. All right, so you can see there, that detail's gone in, so we're using height for this. All right, you can use just a standard alpha. All right, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head which one I use, but we're going to use handprint. All right, so I'm just going to slap this handprint on there. Make sure that I'm using the height. Let's pop it in, and then whoop, there we go. So height detail will work, especially if you go through this again. All right, because we've got that detail in there. It's now got a broken reference, bring that through. We want anchor point and we want detail. You'll then need to turn, obviously, height on. Tell it to reference the height channel. And it should, there we go. So you can see there, it's still dragging that data through, which is lovely. All right. You can even then take that out, and it'll just bring that data in. All right, so don't ever be afraid to sort of mess around with this. It's incredible. Say for instance you're creating bolts and rivets. For some people, creating like cracks indoors, being able to on the fly add details such as cracks, really useful. All right, that way you don't actually have to physically model them. All right, but you can take this one step further. All right, so you could do this rather than just using one detail here. All right, you can then create a whole system. All right, for say mold, something like that. I'm actually just going to break this here. So let me just get rid of you and delete. All right. I just want this detail here. So here, what I've done is I've got it masking from an entire stack in here. All right. So I set up my mold like I would any normal thing. So we can see here I've got these sort of globules of mold and dirt sort of building up. All right. Using my standard masks to make sure it's not covering the entire object, like so. Layering it up, adding extra sections. All right, your standard material generation. But all of this is then fed through this mask, all right, and then another generator. All right, so that generator is then going to have it slowly build up. So I've still got full control of how prevalent this mask is. All right, so I could have it way up at the top like that. We've got tons of mold. All right, it could be a really harsh contrast, really low contrast. All right, so I bring it down so it's just kind of faded. All right, having full control over this. All right, but the main part is being able to use this mold mask then to fill into the gaps left by this. All right, so it starts to work that detail in. So if I then decide I want to create some proper rivets in there, all right, I can then link to this anchor point and start dragging the mold inside cuts created by our objects using the exact same methods I did before. All right. So that's one way you could take it further. If, say, for instance, you wanted objects that could look like they've had damage or wear and tear, you could even go another step further. All right, and this is where it gets a bit complicated. All right, so it's using the exact same thing. So what I've got here is I've got a damage system, all right, that I can draw in. All right, I've got standard outer material. All right, just for this guy's head, and I've got some edgeware, so just so it looks a little bit nicer. All right, but what if I decided I wanted to actually start breaking parts of this thing apart? So I've got what's known as a I've got a paintable mask. All right, this is just a standard paint layer. All right, and I've got my anchor point here. Well, this anchor point is now set up to 3 separate masks on my layers. So I've got one for like wiring and fire, one for inner metal, and one for smoke. All right, so for like smoke damage and things like that. Now, each of these has a bunch of separate effects on them. So if I start painting, I'll show you what I mean. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get something like a scratch or sandpaper. Got sandpaper in here somewhere. I used it. Sandpaper. All right, so you can see that's what sandpaper does if we do it normally. All right, so quite scratchy. Now this is all set up on a displacement mask. So what I've had to do is I've had to create 2 new channels for my textures. You can see them here. Before we only had color through to normal, we now have emissive and displacement. To turn these ones on, all right, what you have to do is you have to go to your texture settings here, and click this little plus icon, and you can see here all the different channels that you can put in. Alright, the one that I wanted to put in are emissive and displacement, because I want this to kind of start glowing. Alright, so they're now in there. Alright, so what I want to do is I'm just messing around with my displacement. So I'm going to Alt and left click that. I will just add a slight amount of displacement in there. So what this is going to do is it's going to start pushing some of the geometry on this to start revealing parts of my mesh. Alright. So you can see now, as I'm pushing it through, this colour is starting to get a little lighter. Alright. And we're revealing new metal underneath. Alright. Like so. If I then start to push this further again, alright, you can start to see this discoloration as well around our geometry. If I push it through further, alright, maybe a little bit too much that, alright, you can start to see it's breaking apart this metal. Alright, I could go for something a little bit more overt, like that. Alright, and what we're getting is a huge difference in materials, all of it driven by anchor points. Alright, so you can see this smoke that I've got on there is really dulling this metallic sort of effect down. You could make this go, say, full black, but what we wanted to do is we wanted to really get rid of that on there. In fact, if we were to bring it out, I can just show that white a little bit easier. There we go. Alright. Let's go for a new alpha. Let's go for let's just go for a standard stencil. There we go. And then drag you down. Alright. So you can see here what's happening. So you're getting this sort of blur of smoke around the side. Alright, our metal is really sort of coming through. It's looking quite battle worn and damaged. And if I chuck this all the way up to full, alright, how intense that fire is. Alright. Now, I don't think I've got tessellation set up in this one, so that'll give me a good reason to show you what to do now. So if you want to make sure that you've got tessellation set up, what you need to do is you need to click this icon here, shader settings. Alright. And scroll down until you've got this. Right. So I'm working with displacement in this rather than height. So if I then click this and zoom out, alright, and start to scale this, alright, you can see how much that displacement is having on our work. Alright, you increase the subdivisions so that it looks a little bit less intense. Alright, and we can then start to bring that displacement back up. And that, so you could come through here. You can see we're just building up our work. And there we have our separate levels of metal to the point where we go almost back to zero and our paint is coming back in. Alright, let me just bring you a little bit smaller. Alright. So just driving anchor points helps create this incredible dynamic system for you guys. Alright. Now, to create something like this, using anchor points. Over on the right hand side, I still have my anchor right here. Now what I've chosen to do is I've gone, well, for this purpose of this demonstration, I've gone for quite a light sort of area for this smoke. Alright, you could go a lot darker depending on how light your material is. Alright, my inner metal. So first off, what I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that the displacement of this is quite harsh. So rather than selecting the mask, I created effects on here. So creating a levels section on here, you can tell it to change the definer, the affected channel. So I obviously changed it to displacement, and that's when any displacement comes onto here, it then gets affected, and you can adjust these very much like you can with your layers in Photoshop. All right. Now my fill adjustment here, what I wanted it to do is I wanted to do this quite dark and sort of like bare metal. All right, I didn't want it to be too much, so that you could see the colour distinction from this sort of nice sort of pearlescent purple into this very deep sort of unburnished metal. All right, and again, just using base colour. But what I did here is I brought the roughness down slightly. All right, to make sure that it looked like it had actually lost some of its sheen. All right. This is where it gets complicated. This is where everything else is driven. All right. So creating a fill layer, call it mask. You can then have that mask be driven by our anchor point. So we can see here, me just changing that, set it back to default. So at the moment it does this. If I then change it back to that, you can see how much of an effect that's having. But if I then change the reference channel to displacement, all right, and adjust this, you can see how much that is now starting to affect our work. All right. All I've done is decide to bring some of these settings across. It's important that when you play around in this, you see how much you want it to affect your work. All right. So where else could this be useful? So what about if you've got rocks that have taken water damage? If you've got a cabinet that's been slightly busted open or like clawed apart, by adjusting some of this on there, you could have sparks that are ignited like a fire inside somewhere. Yeah. All right, you could do it with ground work if you wanted. So if you were creating like a ground texture, and that all of this can then be driven through this. All right. What I've done here is, again, I've used a blur. So this blur will essentially change how much that displacement is then masked over this. So you can see here on the left-hand side, that's quite sharp. By doing this, it's making it not look as bobbled and kind of looks smoothed down. So keeping it around there. Clouds, essentially, this is just a grayscale sort of mask. So you can see there, I can control how much that detail then comes through. Obviously, for kind of broken metal, I wanted this to look quite aggressive. So I'll bring those back to where they were. And again, the levels, it's just adjusting how extra that contrast is on top of it. So see there, still just kind of getting a little bit through. All right. This is where I'd say it's slightly more, again, complex. So you can see here, this is how intense this fire is going to be. So how you would probably set up fire normally, you work with two different types of colours. So you work with the fire at its sort of core, and then how bright you want it to be in its emissive. So this is where I turned on my emissive channel right there.
I think the factor of that would be like how recent the fire damage was done.
Exactly.
Because like if it's been given time to cool, then obviously it needs to be like a darker shade. But if it's like brand new, like something has broken out or fire damage has recently happened, then it'll be a lot brighter because of the liquid metal.
Yeah, exactly. So here I can obviously change the emissive colour. And that, now what I wanted to do is I wanted the red to really sort of burn through, so it looks like it's melting the metal into some sort of like slag. All right. And then I've just got my standard fire colour, which just helps drive that extra bit. So I wanted this, again, this extra warm colour just to help complement the emissive. I've then got a levels on the emissive. So what I've done is so by default it's about this. But if I push this up, I'm starting to blend that red really sort of focused into the center, so that emissive looks like it's actually at the core rather than on everything. But if you want a more vibrant explosion, you can obviously start dragging this down. So actually, if I wanted to, I could bring that in. We've still got some red in there, it's quite nice, but I think I prefer this nice sort of blend with this orange hue in the center. Alright, again, they're just on the main. On the mask section, so this internals, again we've got a mask that is driven as per usual via a displacement. I've got another blur. Now you can change this blur I've put as quite intensive, so you can see it's kind of blending through a fair amount. Alright, it's up to you how much you do this. So like that there, we're just starting to get this little bit of like the heat is just starting to penetrate through some of this metal. It's getting quite hot inside. Again, it's up to you how far you want to sort of take this and that, but remember that the fire is not going to sort of do something like that. I mean, you're still getting the smoke in there, which makes it look quite smoky. And that, but the idea is it's probably just going to start to penetrate through some other areas. And you can see how much of an effect that blur actually has. All right, I've got two separate masks on here then that help drive this. So we can obviously see we've got this one here, which is changing our overall contrast and visibility. And then I've got this one here, which is essentially exemplifying that, which gives us our second mask. Now this multiplier, what it'll do is it'll make some areas more prone to be visible. And that's why when we were driving our blur earlier on, we were getting some areas where it's starting to poke through very lightly. All right, that's where our two layers come in. All right, and then again, we just got a standard level in here, and this change just drives the contrast of our overall mask. So obviously you can bring it down quite far. You then do this. All right, so you could, in fact, if you wanted, just to have it very, very, very light in terms of damage. And all of that, because it's so procedural, you can have fun with it. Well, all of that is then painted just by our displacement down here. You can see there, we're driving that damage home. All right, so that is anchor points. All right, anchor points are the absolute most important for adding extra procedurally generated materials to your work, to adding different states. If you wanted something to look wet, all right, adding an anchor point to increase the roughness and change the color of it, again, very, very important. All right, but you have to experiment. All right. I know you guys have got trees and bushes in yours, so having something that's set up with just sort of a standard bush, but then using this to drive leaf opacity, and that you'd be able to get different subsets, different materials that you could drive through. You guys are doing your assignments. Yours could be mold, and that, or damage to chairs or tiles. All of it can then be driven through this. All right. So once this tutorial's over, I'm going to have a look at your hacking plans again. All right, and I want to see roughly what you guys have done today via that. Remember, your metric data is important to me. All right, does anyone have any questions? No? Awesome. Right, that is the tutorial over.